Do the participants have any questions to Rupert about what he was talking about? Feel free to open your microphones and cameras and ask.
I have a question, if I may. Susanne from Eskilstuna.
Yeah.
If there is a possibility, I do not know what list of information you have, but probably there will be some sensible data, perhaps, which you want to exchange between the institutions. Now you have said that you're only doing this by email. Is there some kind of safety by, what's it in English, to make it safe, to crypt them? Is there, how are you doing that so that you are safe that this data does not be attacked or hacked or something like
that? We're aware that that is a potential problem, and we haven't fixed on a solution yet, but we know that it's something we will need to look at over the next year. I'm very aware that that is something that's going to be very important for everybody. So no solution, but we will implement one.
Rupert, if I may say, this data is nowadays sent often by email anyway. So sometimes, yeah. So also that data could be hacked, and the emails do have the how do you call it, encryption systems and safe systems. But maybe you are right, we should recommend something. And then I will just read you a couple of comments here from the chat, where Trevor said that nice to see a pragmatic approach to granularity, with which I agree. And Frances, yes, she suggested the encryption of the messages.
Yeah.
So please go on. Does anybody else want to ask questions from Rupert? And by the way, nice to see Marcin there in the screen. Sorry if I take a personal pause, because he was just writing to me a few days ago, and I said, hey guys, you should join us. So glad to see you are here. Marcin is from Poland, so please.
Hello everyone.
I don't know
if you can hear me.
Yes.
We actually, well, I'm attending because we were actually speaking about the system that would do the same, and we actually didn't know anything about EODEM works. So with my registrar colleagues, we are very grateful for the works, because this is very needed. We in 2011, I remember we borrowed, I think, 2,500 objects to our museum. I was working in National Museum in Gdańsk, and we lent, I think, about 700 objects from our museum. And if you know the museum work, this should be counted twice, because you lend out and you take it in. So all this work was done in paper. We of course had Xero machines. We had paper documents, and we started also to send the data by Excel. But now, when there's a problem with the stuff, we would like to have the system that does this automatically. And of course, I think the EODEM will be ready in a year or something like this. Yes, I'm not sure. But how can we now prepare for this? Because the vendor's case is one thing, but the museums and the staff and the data, what can you do now to help put it in line?
Make sure you have the data that you need and that it's good and tidy, really. It'll depend on what the vendor of the system that you use will implement and how they'll do it. So speak to them about it, and if they're not thinking of implementing it, tell them that they really should. But the key thing is just to make sure that you have as good data as possible. The more data that you have and the better condition it's in, the more useful it will be to the receiving institution. And we can certainly circulate links to the draft standard and everything, and so that will show you what units of information we are talking about transferring.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rupert, for the answer, and thank you for our Polish colleagues for the interest and the question. Are there any other questions at this moment?
Yeah, I have a question.
Hi, Alexei.
Hello. So for now, we are limiting ourselves to transferring data about objects, because there's the case, for example, in our museum, the photography collections, and we print ourselves the works that are sent to us, where the transfer of the objects themselves is also making sense. Of course, not via ML. So in the case of we are receiving some exhibition in a digital format, and it contains description, mostly it contains description data, not the data about the objects, how to store them, because we don't store anything in this case. But we also receive digital files that we are using to print. So should it be separated from the EODEM, or could it be an extension or part of EODEM? And what do you think?
Well, one thing EODEM does allow you to send is an image of the object. So effectively a digital file. So if the digital file is the object, then you can include it with your EODEM file, potentially. It'll make for a very big file, because I imagine these will be very high resolution, you know, JPEGs, if not uncompressed TIFFs, but it could just fit in that way. It might be that we should consider qualifying the kind of image to distinguish between something that's a representative of the object and something that is the object. But we already have space for a file name for an image that represents the object, and indeed a MIME type for it.
Rupert, just an idea, would it be better to just include a link rather than the whole file?
We can do either. Yes, the ideal is that the image
so that the file
is
doesn't get
available online, but if it's alone, you're probably not putting that big master file visibly somewhere.
Yes, because the EODEM interchange sort of payload is an XML document, and obviously the image isn't in the document, it's simply referenced by it. So whether you choose to bundle up the image as part of a zip file and send it, or whether you simply have a reference to where it can be found, is a choice you can make.
Sorry, I'm just making a note of this as a potential requirement.
Good man.
Yeah, I noted it too, so we can compare our notes after the session. Any more questions from the audience? I know that there is a little bit of a delay, so I will still wait for a couple of moments if anybody is jumping up. And if not, I would have a suggestion. We have about 1 hour time of the session, and we are slightly ahead of the schedule. So if you would like to have a 10-minute pause, please use the chat and say yes. And if you don't want to pause for 10 minutes, say no, so that we can take some sort of poll if we continue right away with Richard Light's presentation, or if we move around a little bit, get a cup of tea. So what do you think? What does the chat say? No, no. Okay, good. So far, tea, no.
Come on, Rupert.
I'm happy to crack on if you like. It doesn't matter.
yeah. Good. Well, I think at this moment the no votes were for like the winning votes. So sorry for those of you who want tea. Go very quick. I will try to keep chattering a little bit longer. Yeah. So we will now go on with Richard's and Jette's presentation on the practical issues, and after that we will again pause for some questions. So how is your slide sharing going on, Richard?
Okay, well, I thought I would just talk to start with. I have a link to a screen I can move on to after introducing, what I've done. But I thought I'd just talk because I'm having recorded my CIDOC talk and found it comes out very boring when you have to do it on the pre-record. I thought I would do this totally live and hopefully be more interesting.
You go for it, and then if there is anything you need to, you just say pause and we'll do it.
We will show some stuff a bit later, but I thought that was going to be my sort of war stories first, and then we would go on from there. Okay, so I've been looking at EODEM from the point of view of a specific collections management system, which is called MODES, which is based in the UK. So it's mainly a system for smaller museums, and we've got over 600 of them using it. Within MODES, there is an application for cataloguing museum objects, as you'd expect. And a feature of MODES is that it's actually based on XML. So all the records are actually stored as XML documents, which obviously made life a bit easier for me in the context of working with EODEM. The data structure we have is quite flexible and allows the grouping of information in a way that allows you to repeat information if you've got a lot of different things to say, and also allows you to analyze it quite deeply if that's what you want to do. But it also has note fields, so if you decide you just want to put in the sort of descriptive string that Rupert was describing, then you can do that as well, or instead. So that's the context I was looking at. I was then sent some example records. So Rupert has a National Gallery record of a Titian with massive detail, and Jette also sent in a couple of records that she had managed to create. So they were both in the EODEM format, and so the challenge I set myself was to try and actually get that data into the MODE system. So in order to do that, I had to take the EODEM XML format and convert it into the MODES XML format. In order to do that, I use a technology called XSLT, which is a standard for transforming XML documents into other stuff, including other XML documents. And so I set out to write what's called an XSLT style sheet that would convert the input data and re-render it in a format that would actually import into modes. And what I found was that the structural elements in EODEM worked quite well with the structural elements in modes. The areas which were more difficult were those which were related to sort of object requirements areas, which again we've seen are not actually routinely recorded in museum cataloging systems. So I had to use a certain amount of imagination to work out where that information could actually go in a modes record. So I wrote one style sheet to import the data into modes and reformat it. And then I wrote another style sheet to take the data out of modes and put it into the EODEM format. And I felt my work was getting reasonably close to complete when I could take Rupert's records specifically, import it into modes, then export it again and have the result look roughly like the record I'd started with. Now then, for the technical minded amongst you, this is known as round tripping, being able to take the data round through a process and have it emerge at the far end, looking much the same as it began life. And by doing that, I was able to reassure myself that the mappings of the data were reasonably worthwhile and accurate. Now, I've obviously only worked with the source records that I've been given, so I've not necessarily covered every last wrinkle of EODEM possibilities, and I suspect I will have to go back to my style sheets in the future and make them more comprehensive. But broadly speaking, I've now been able to take my import style sheet and tell modes about it, so that when I run an import process and it looks at the data I'm importing, and it's obvious that it's an EODEM file because of the header, it knows which style sheet to use. So it goes and grabs my EODEM style sheet and does the right conversion. So as far as the user's concerned, they're just running the standard import process. And in the same way on export, you can choose what format you want to export data. And again, I can set that up in mode, so it is just one of the standard formats that you pick. So that's basically how I've been entertaining myself for the last couple of weeks working on this project. I was helped by the fact that the Art UK project, which was mentioned earlier, has also been using the Lido schema. So I'd already done some work in writing code to take data out of modes and get it into a generic Lido format. So that's again something that other system vendors may find useful, because Lido has been used, for example, in the Europeana Inside project. And so then other vendors will have already had to grapple with it in order to get data out for Europeana. I think EODEM is going to present new challenges, because getting data in is always harder than getting data out, because you actually have to find precisely where it's going to live. But and the other thing I've entertained myself with doing is writing a general purpose XSL style sheet for actually viewing data. At this point, I will attempt to share my screen. And I think it's that one. There we are. Okay, so that is Rupert's National Gallery record in EODEM format, but that is displayed using the viewer application that I've developed, which therefore shows the structure of that data in T arrives, see. in HTML format. So that gives you a nice user-friendly way of viewing the data that you're interchanging. So by putting a suitable instruction at the top of the interchange format, you can automatically get it displayed in this nice user-friendly format. Okay, so that's my sort of overview. Shall we see if people have questions on that? And then maybe Jette can come in and we can talk about the sort of interchange process. You're muted, Maija.
Yeah, I had also some clanging on the background. So do you want to stop sharing, Richard, so it's easier to see a bigger group of people? And if there is, put you on a gallery view. I hope that all of you have.
I've had this before, actually. Yes, this is where stop share ceases.
Okay.
So, yep, all good, Richard.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's good for everyone but me, because it doesn't actually stop sharing on my machine.
Okay, Richard.
Okay, I can hear you anyway, so.
Oh, gosh. Do you want to take a little bit more time trying to fix?
No, don't worry. I think the only way out of this is
you can live without our faces, huh?
I think I'll have to, Maija. Yeah.
Ooh,
okay, yeah. Go for it.
Yes. Sami Norling is asking you, Richard, if your XSL files are available somewhere in GitHub or?
Well, no, the plan is for the viewer XSLT to be part of the standard EODEM release and documentation. The aim is for that to be available both for sharing and also for it to be somewhere on the web, so that you can simply refer to it with an HTTP reference, and your browser will just pick it up and use it. The import and export style sheets, because they're specifically targeted at the modes of object recording data structure, I suppose could be useful for people with other data structures, but obviously won't directly work. But they could be a model, I suppose, for other people implementing mappings to different systems. So that's actually a really useful thought. I'd be very, very happy to share them. I don't see them as secret in any way.
I think that Richard's contacts are not on our slides yet, but we could just add them before publishing. So if that's okay. Or do you want, Richard, that people contact myself or Rupert and we will forward your information, or how do you want to connect with Sami?
I'll if I can get back to the I just found the menu at the top, so I may be able to.
Good. You might be able to send him a chat message.
Return to the meeting.
Yeah. So Sami sent the message to everybody, so you can either reply to everybody or him privately in the chat. So you guys will get in contact with each other. Good. Are there any other questions, or shall we let also Jette join the presenters? Please, Jette, the stage is yours.
Yes. Okay. Hello. My name is Jette Klein-Berning, and I'm working for CIDOC in Germany. We are providing the collector's management system Museum Plus, which some of you probably know, or most of you hopefully. And I was participating in this working group on EODEM since this year. And I also tried, like Richard, to both create an alpha version of an export for EODEM based on a Lido export that is already possible with Museum Plus. And of course, also the other more difficult way around to re-import data. And luckily, Richard and Rupert worked on example records and provided them. And so I try to share my screen and show you what we achieved so far in the alpha version. And I hope everything works fine, even if I'm doing it live. So you should see my screen right now and see data import on the upper side. Yes, great. So we are in Museum Plus right now, and I prepared a data import. So I got a data example from Rupert, which you should be seeing right now. So you are seeing the core XML data here with, for those of you not fluent in XML, looks like a lot of characters and structures. For those of you more interested or even knowing Lido already, you can see base structure here on the tree view on the left-hand side. And to just talk about the contents, it contains the data units that Rupert talked about before. So the general main information that you need to exchange with the other museum or the other institution, like the title, the event number, also your details about the vendor, and everything else about the object, which is important for the borrowing institution. So in Museum Plus itself, we have a rough draft of a data import module there, and it simply takes the import file, which is the EODEM file, and some kind of mapping, which says where to put the information from the EODEM file into the managed database. And now, I must apologize, it's not that exciting, but if I click on the button, so doing exactly that, what Rupert showed at the beginning of the dream of EODEM, it should do something, which means importing. And now what you saw, something appeared below and says like import started and import completed. So hopefully, if I go back to the Museum Plus object module and now search for the newly imported record, here we are at 5:19 today. I just created a new record which contains the EODEM National Gallery file, which has an artist, which has a title, which has numbers, and has different other data and descriptions, and also things like or object requirements about what should happen if it's filmed or photographed, or a temperature details, very many temperature details delivered, and so on, like looks and ultraviolet details. So this should hopefully be nearly the same way, or at least the result should be the same in other vendors' systems, so that the interchange and interoperability of the different systems and museums, independently what system they use, should be eased and should happen more easily. Okay, yes, and of course we can export our data the same way around. So that's what I did when I gave my data, example data, only pictures data, to the other participants in the group. And there we have the Lido EODEM application profile. So all the data which should be given to a borrowing institution is there. Okay, thank you. I will unshare my screen. If I can do that. Maybe someone can stop. I know. I have it. Yeah.
Okay. You got it, Jette. Thank you. You made it look pretty exciting, and there were some sound effects in the background too, so it was
okay.
impressive in that way too. So, would somebody like to pose questions to Jette and or Richard about their war stories?
Yeah, sorry, I had to leave and come back. I've got rid of my screen now. Okay.
Oh, so that was it. You were just tossing a screen away.
Yes, it's a Linux laptop, and for some reason it doesn't want to relinquish the screen once it's got it. So,
well, I'm good that you are a man of action. So. Got the problem dealt with. So, how does this look to you, our participants? Does anybody want to comment or say something, or are you all, how do you say, not able to speak from the awe?
shocked. I mean, one observation I would make is that it's made me think about how you would actually engineer this sort of information within an individual museum system. So if you're thinking of lending 50 objects out from your collection, I think it's highly unlikely that you would actually want to record for every one of those 50 objects the precise terms and conditions that you wanted to apply to loaning them out. And you probably actually have a general policy about loans, and you'd have this information stored somewhere else. So in the context, certainly, of the mode system, I was thinking that the sort of requirements type information, some of it might come from the object record, but I would think the majority you'd actually want to store in a separate record somewhere else in the system, and just have a small number of different types of conditions. So you'd have one for your fine art, one for your natural history collections, perhaps, which would have different requirements, and then a sort of generic, any old social history stuff requirements. And so the technical requirement then becomes finding a place to store those general policies, and then being able to bring them in automatically into the EODEM record, so that you're not sort of burdened with having to record lots of additional information in each object record, because I think that way you rapidly become disenchanted with the entire process.
Oh, yes. And that was also my question at some point of the working group work. I said that not all systems necessarily have the fields for temperature requirements or such information, but that is exactly stored somewhere else, for example, in the loan agreements type of thing. So I'm happy that you take this into consideration.
Yes, well, it was suggested by, I think, Rupert, that in fact, when you've got to that level of detail, you're more or less producing a loan agreement in your EODEM record.
Yes.
You certainly have the means of making one.
And actually, I mean, the document we've been working with was, this is not data we have in our system in the National Gallery at the moment. I hacked large chunks of it out of the loan agreement. But of course, if you do start having that data stored somewhere because you want to output it into EODEM, then you may as well generate your loan agreements on the fly using a report template. Conversely, a lot of people do that already, so it may be that you can leverage what you've got in the loan agreement to populate the EODEM record.
Okay, now I have questions in the chat. Can I start popping them out?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Unless you want to check it yourself, but I might as well collect them. So Suzanne was curious about how much time it took to implement the EODEM model into Museum Plus. This is clearly for Jette. Is Norbert listening? Can you really be honest about this?
Oh, yeah.
Or do you want to reply privately?
No. Everybody should know.
Okay, thank you, Norbert.
Yeah, certainly. Yes, the export of the EODEM probably did not take that much time, as we have a Lido export routine already. So it just needed to be adapted a bit to fit the need of EODEM application profile. The other way around of importing was the first time for me to really implement an import into Museum Plus. But still, this had been starting just a few weeks ago. And as I am not working 100% of my day just for the EODEM, it was a reasonable time, but still, and if we also had the draft version still of EODEM and the Lido version 1.1, so it was more getting the Lido fit the real new version of Lido 1.1 than a real implementation work. So we aim to have some kind of standard export and import format that can then be adapted later for the different individual implementations of Museum Plus, because we do not have one standard solution for everyone, but individualized solutions. So there it would be sometimes, not every time, necessary to adapt it to the individual solution to fit the fields and the contents into the right target fields and into the database. But generally, this should not be like weeks of work, but just some hours or a day or several days, depending on the system. So yeah, generally I just started to do that about 3 weeks ago on spare time.
Okay, so let's say that your estimate would be 1 to 5 working days in total if you spread it out. Would that be about it, or 1 to 2 weeks?
It depends on the release draft of the Lido, so I think I can say something about that if it's released.
Okay, but I think we got an idea. Is not impossible. Well, the next question is from Natalie. Okay, did it escape from me already? More questions coming. She asked if we have any other computer management system vendors interested in doing the same. So now we have modes here. What about Rupert? Are you convinced with TMS?
Well,
talk to somebody.
Did I see Martin somewhere? I think TMS will be interested if enough users persuade them that it's worth their while doing it. And they are certainly interested. They've been coming to some of our meetings, but they're very commercially minded as an organization. I think that's fair to say. We do have other vendors coming to the workshop in a couple of days' time, and that does include people from Axial, which I think might answer somebody else's question in the chat. The other thing is that he's not here at the moment, but knowledge integration have been heavily involved in this. Indeed, the first implementation of the EODEM data standard as a Lido profile was drawn up by Rob Tice from Knowledge Integration. And of course, they as middleware providers provide another route for this, that it may be that if an individual software company doesn't implement it, then a middleware company might leap in, and they have about 20 clients in the UK for whom they provide effectively data aggregation, mapping and export services in their product. But generally, if you like what you see, go and speak to your software vendor and persuade them that this would be a really good idea, because we need as many as possible to implement it for it to be as useful as it should be.
And also, when you go to talk to the vendor, you can tell them that there is a whole support network of people who are willing on sharing on their experiences. It's not only that we put out the document and say go for it.
Do you hear me? Can I add something maybe at this point?
Absolutely. We can hear you, not see, but go for it.
Okay, I can switch on my camera. It's very dark here. You can see me.
Yes, we can.
I think this is going to be extremely important now that the groundwork is done and the ideas are set, and we just polish it a little bit and make it a real standard somehow. The whole thing does only make sense if a critical amount of collection management system vendors adopt this new standard. Otherwise, there is nothing to exchange, to be honest.
Yeah.
So this is something I'm very much looking forward to the discussion on Wednesday, because it has to do with, you know, making people aware that there is something new which can be very useful and time-saving. And you all remember for Lido, it also took a lot of time until museums knew what Lido might be or do for them. And I think the same thing could be with EODEM, probably, hopefully faster than the adoption of Lido, which took a number of years. But yes, I mean, also the audience here, if you have connections to your vendor, or if you are involved in the production of a collection management system, spread the word. It's really, it's the first time that we try to achieve interoperability between different systems used in museums worldwide. So it doesn't look very much, but I think it's a very big thing. I mean, Jette clicked on the button and okay, but I think the idea behind it and the work done in the details is super important and could be very, very useful for many, many collections and museums in the future. Thanks.
Thank you for your words, Norbert. You are one of the people who have been pushing the idea. So we have to thank you too for giving the time and resources for Jette to do this and be part of it.
Sure, our pleasure.
So let's quickly look at the comments. I think these answers have responded to some of your questions. So yes, it should be possible to implement on almost any museum database, but it is the developers, the vendors' job to do it. Museum people can just ask for it and encourage them to do it. And thank you for the compliments which we have here. There is also a question if the data needs to be cleaned before the import to match the receiving end's data, and also managing of the that's practically the same question about how to manage the object data units that are different from your dictionaries.
I say a little bit about that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of cleaning up the values, it's up to the vendor how they want to handle that in terms of what they map the unit of information to. I think you should assume that you're going to be getting a chunk of text in most cases. And no, we don't include vocabulary alignment in EODEM as it stands. You get the terms that the other organization gives you, and we're deliberately keeping the barrier to implementation very low. So we're not asking for external identifiers, sort of external vocabulary keys, ULAN references and things like that. Now, because we're using Lido, that can be provided. So if a vendor wants to include some system for, say, making sure that the maker's name is mapped to an existing authority record rather than just imported as a string, they can do that, and it would be great. and I think their customers would thank them for it, because nobody wants multiple occurrences of the same person in their personal authority. But we're certainly not insisting on it. I think that quite a lot of systems do have tools, for example, for mapping data to existing authorities on import, or for deduping multiple occurrences of names in authorities like the personal authority, and that hopefully that's code that could be leveraged for that part of EODEM. But we're deliberately not insisting on anything like that. As I say, it's better to have some data than no data, even if it's dirty data at this case. You know, if 50% of it's good, you're still 50% better on than you were before. And there may be a manual tidying job to do afterwards to make it match with your system. But very often people have different data standards for short-term loans in than for accessioned objects, say. So it may be good enough for your exhibition management. It doesn't have to meet the full gold standard of the object that is one of your top 100 objects that has pride of place on your website.
And it's worth remembering, being sort of optimistic about this, that Lido provides support for linked data URLs,
yes,
which obviously are unambiguous and cross-system. So insofar as your systems may be able to actually include those URLs in the interchange data, it will mean that the quality of data being mapped across is that much higher, and your certainty that it's the right data will be much greater.
Yeah, we don't insist on it, but it's the space is there. Anything that has a term, Lido lets you add an identifier, and we're certainly not rejecting those. Jette, do you want to add anything on this? I saw you nodding.
Yeah, nodding, absolutely. It's one part, of course, is the way of how it can be implemented and what the system allows or not, and also what the user and the database user wants to have. So do they want to preserve the original terms exactly delivered and just import them to have them, as you said, like having 50% correctly and 50% maybe dirty is better than having nothing. And of course, it depends on the complexity that will be done. So the most simple and the best way to do it is to have the approach to try to import everything which is there, which can be imported, because as you said, not all systems differ in how they present the data and the granularity, and also if they can reach online resources like Lido terminology, ULAN, and so on. So I think that all vendors will try to import the best solution and the best quality of data they get and which they can import. So the main goal should be to have the main information there.
I think one idea that occurs to me, as I mentioned, I was doing a direct XML to XML transformation. But for a lot of people, the sort of spreadsheet type format will probably be much more helpful and more compatible with the import framework they've got. And maybe if we had a sort of generic style sheet that converts from the EODEM Lido format into spreadsheet format, that might actually be a quick and dirty way of getting information into systems that might help avoid having to have a full-blown implementation by the vendor. It certainly might be an idea we could usefully explore.
If I may, I think that probably the useful implementation of this would be some kind of web editor for this format, generic with only small subset of possible items that could read EODEM format and also write it for people whose vendors are still not ready to implement the format. I don't know, it sounds a little bit controversial because it can make the acceptance of vendors slower because it's in a different way, but maybe not.
So I think now we are already talking about, a fallback position. Now we are not even finished with the work of defining the standards in the very last detail and publishing it. As soon as it's published, I think our goal has to be that it's going to be adopted by the typical collection management software vendors. And if you have a bespoke proprietary system or your homegrown system, I mean, the standard is published or is going to be published and open, and you can implement it yourself into your system as well. But I would prefer putting effort into talking with vendors and, slightly gently pushing them into adopting the standard instead of thinking already now about the fallback position. But it's a good thing to talk about this. But I think the priority should be to have this implemented by the core vendors as soon as possible, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Norbert. Yes, there was actually a question from Patrick. If we can implement such a system without the help of our friends, it's meaning vendors. So I think that we want to make better friends with the vendors and have them implement it. Would someone still like to open their mic and say something? You have been doing great talking and discussing and commenting. Thank you for that. A special thank you for our active audience, because we were a little bit nervous about how to get it rolling.
In terms of implementing without vendors, I suppose it depends on how happy you are taking the data in your systems and playing with it yourself. If you're happy writing, say, SQL queries and converting the output into XML, then yes, you can do it yourself. I'm not sure I would recommend it unless you've got the sort of solid programming chops to do it, but it's a possibility. But as Maija said, I think the default position, and indeed Norbert, should be to try and persuade the software vendor to implement it, both to your benefit and to everybody else's.
My microphone. Yes, now it's on. So thank you for the doers and makers of this. And now I would suggest the only interactive, truly interactive part of this session before I will briefly conclude this and let you go, almost 15 minutes before the official closing time. So let's see how our bandwidths are doing. Please turn on your cameras, everybody who has a camera. I would like to see your faces. Okay, cameras turning on. And then turn on your microphones too. I want to see those red mics disappearing. Okay, good. I can see so many of you there. Great. Patrick, hi.
Hi.
I don't know many of you by face, so I noticed that there are a lot of new people. And then even those who don't have cameras, you can turn your microphones on if you hear what I'm saying. And I would like to give a great virtual applause for the doers of this. I have been only watching and trying to make them do this. So
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this. Great.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And I'm not going to suggest any virtual singing in a choir or anything like that, because you wouldn't probably attend our next session. But if you have the reactions, you can also send party poppers and hearts and things if you want. Good. Thumbs up. Great. So just to say a few words, thank you again for everybody who has been participating this. Why do I have the feedback? Are you hearing me okay?
I think everybody will need to mute their microphones.
Yeah, mute the microphones. Just a second for that. Sorry, I forgot. Just without slides, I wanted to conclude the session with few words. First, to say thank you for all those who have been working somehow on this, giving ideas, giving their time, and also those people who were not able to be present today, because we know that there are other things than conferences where you sometimes have to be. So in this session, we first heard about the history of EODEM, how it started, how we carried it out, and how it will work. Richard and Jette and Rupert were able to give you a great demonstrations how it already works with a push of the button, just like we thought it would and visualized it would someday. There was also some questions, concerns about the security of the data transfer. We heard about Polish colleagues sharing about their starting project, which might use EODEM. There was also questions about digital exhibitions and transferring digital objects, which we will all note and put into our work plan. Then Richard promised to share his XSLT file. Did I get the letters right? Anyway, as soon as we have something to share, we will publish it. You can follow the digital documentation standards working group web pages. We will publish it there. We will probably also put something on the CIDOC web pages. Rupert is hosting a mailing list for the developers, so you can also contact him to send your address and you to keep up on the day. And then we had a great discussion. I'm glad you were happy for the work my colleagues have been doing. I'm happy we got such a strong support for people being willing on implementing this in their systems. So thank you all. Maybe I will see some of you tomorrow. We will have the EODEM and LIDO working group tomorrow. If somebody has not been able to register to it and wants to register, you can just send me a note in the chat. I can send you the link to the session. However, I give a warning, it's relatively technical. So if this was up here, then just wait and relax and talk to your vendor On Wednesday, we will get together with Jette, Norbert, and many other vendors, and we will discuss about the real practical next steps. So as Rupert invited earlier, if you are a software vendor and don't yet have the invitation link for this meeting, please either contact Rupert or put a message on the chat. We will try to catch it. And then on Thursday, Jonathan Whitson-Cloud, who might be here, who might not be, I think he had a meeting. Well, he talks about museum practice wiki. But that was about all I had to say. We did great with the time. We are now about 20 minutes ahead of the schedule. So I will keep the meeting open until, let's say, 6 o'clock, so that we can, after closing, still chat informally, but then we will let our next colleagues to start their setup work.
Maija, shall I just put the thank you slide with my contact details up?
Oh, yes, please
Yeah.
do that.
And I've put my email in the chat.
Good. And these will be published in the, some of the contacts are already in the documentation standards working group page. But yes, please do share your contacts.
But I think we can all still chat around that, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. And Carol, if you are still there, I think now it's a time you can stop the recording.